Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving into a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz in defense circles, the rather bold claim that Iran is setting its sights on the two largest U.S. warships. Now, on the surface, that sounds almost impossible, right? But when you dig a little deeper into Iran's military doctrine, it starts to make a certain kind of asymmetric sense.
It really does, DONFELIXX. When I first heard that, my mind immediately went to aircraft carriers, because what else could the two largest even refer to? And then you think about the sheer power difference between the U.S. Navy and Iran's naval capabilities, and it just seems almost suicidal. So what exactly is the strategic thinking behind such a formidable claim?
Exactly, Jane. It's crucial to understand that Iran doesn't operate under the same conventional naval warfare paradigm as the U.S. or other major powers. They know they can't match the U.S. Navy ship for ship or even fleet for fleet. Their entire doctrine is built around asymmetric warfare. The goal isn't to defeat the U.S. in a direct naval engagement, it's to make any U.S. military operation in the region so incredibly costly, so politically and economically damaging, that it becomes untenable.
So it's less about a head-on battle and more about a war of attrition or perhaps a massive deterrent. They want to raise the stakes so high that the U.S. thinks twice before acting. Is that the gist of it?
Precisely. And to achieve that, they leverage a few key advantages and capabilities. Firstly, geography. The Persian Gulf, particularly the Strait of Hormuz, is a choke point. It's relatively narrow and it's surrounded by Iranian coastlines and islands. This environment favors smaller, agile craft and shore-based missile systems over large, deep-water naval vessels.
Ah, the Strait of Hormuz. We hear about that quite a bit in relation to oil shipments, but it makes perfect sense how it would be a strategic bottleneck for naval forces too. So they're not talking about attacking these carriers in the middle of the open ocean, but rather when they're in a more confined space?
Absolutely. That's where their strategy becomes clearer. They've invested heavily in what's often described as a swarm tactic. Imagine hundreds of fast attack craft, some armed with missiles, others with torpedoes, all launching simultaneously. Add to that a mix of drones, both surveillance and attack drones, and a barrage of anti-ship cruise missiles and even anti-ship ballistic missiles fired from shore. The idea is to overwhelm a carrier strike group's defenses through sheer volume.
That sounds incredibly chaotic and difficult to defend against, even for a carrier strike group. With all their advanced missile defense systems and escort ships, the visual of a swarm really paints a picture of saturation.
It's designed to be. A U.S. carrier strike group is designed to operate in open oceans, projecting power. In a confined space like the Gulf, its advantages can be mitigated. The layered defense of a carrier group is formidable, but it's not impenetrable to a coordinated, multi-axis attack using a diverse set of weapons. Some of which are very low-tech and cheap, like small boats, while others are sophisticated, like their ballistic missiles.
So they're using quantity to try and overcome quality in a way. And you mentioned anti-ship ballistic missiles. That's a relatively newer capability for Iran, isn't it? I remember hearing some concerns about their development.
It is. They've certainly made advancements there. These aren't your typical cruise missiles. Ballistic missiles come down at very steep angles, often at hypersonic speeds, making them incredibly difficult to intercept. If Iran has developed a reliable anti-ship variant, capable of terminal guidance, that adds a significant new layer to their threat matrix against large naval assets.
Wow, so you have the swarm of smaller boats, potentially suicide drones, cruise missiles, and now ballistic missiles. It really is a full-spectrum asymmetric approach. But what about their submarine fleet? Are they a factor in this strategy?
Absolutely, Jane. Iran has a relatively small but surprisingly effective submarine fleet, primarily made up of midget submarines and a few larger Kilo-class boats they acquired from Russia. While they might not be on par with the U.S. nuclear submarines, in the shallow, murky waters of the Persian Gulf, these smaller, quieter submarines can be incredibly difficult to detect. They can lay mines, launch torpedoes, and act as reconnaissance platforms, adding another layer of threat from below the surface.
So it's not just a surface and air threat, but an underwater one too. It sounds like they're trying to create a nightmare scenario for any large U.S. warship entering the Gulf. But what about the two largest specific claim? Is that just rhetoric, or do they genuinely believe they could target, say, 2 aircraft carriers?
It's a mix, I think. Part rhetoric, part strategic communication. By specifically mentioning the 2 largest warships, they're sending a clear message. We're not just aiming for small fry. We're prepared to challenge your most formidable assets. It's about instilling fear and uncertainty. Whether they could successfully sink 2 carriers is highly debatable, and frankly, unlikely given the U.S. Navy's defensive capabilities and countermeasures.
Right, because even if they launch 1,000 drones and missiles, the U.S. Navy has advanced electronic warfare, anti-missile systems, and simply a massive amount of firepower to defend itself. It's not a given that any of those attacks would actually get through.
Precisely. But Iran doesn't necessarily need to sink them to achieve their strategic goals. Even inflicting significant damage, causing a loss of life, or forcing a carrier to withdraw for repairs would be considered a massive victory for them. It would be a huge blow to U.S. prestige, a morale boost for their own forces, and a massive geopolitical earthquake.
That makes a lot of sense. So the objective isn't annihilation but disruption and demonstrating capability. It's about projecting strength and deterring intervention, rather than winning a conventional naval battle, and it highlights the difference in how different military powers approach conflict.
Exactly. And let's not forget the political dimension. Such threats are often timed with regional tensions or specific geopolitical events. They're a way for Iran to assert its influence, respond to perceived threats, and signal its resolve to both regional adversaries and global powers. It's a key component of their deterrence strategy.
So it's not just military, it's highly political. And what about the actual readiness or capability? Do they conduct exercises that simulate these kinds of attacks? I've seen some footage of their naval drills and they can look pretty intense.
They absolutely do. Iran regularly conducts naval exercises in the Persian Gulf, often simulating attacks on mock U.S. warships, sometimes even using mock aircraft carriers. These exercises are partly for training, partly for propaganda, and partly to demonstrate to the world, and crucially to the U.S., that they are indeed serious about these capabilities and their asymmetric approach.
That's pretty stark. Using mock carriers really sends a message. It's almost like they're saying, we're practicing, and we're ready.
But what are the potential consequences of such an engagement, even if it's just a demonstration of capability or a limited attack that doesn't fully sink a carrier?
The consequences would be catastrophic for the region and potentially globally. Any attack on a U.S. naval vessel, especially a major one like a carrier, would undoubtedly lead to a severe and overwhelming U.S. response. It would escalate tensions dramatically, potentially spiraling into a wider conflict.
The Strait of Hormuz could be disrupted, impacting global oil prices and trade routes. It's a very dangerous game of brinkmanship.
So, while Iran's strategy might be to deter, it also carries the immense risk of igniting a much larger conflict that no one truly wants. It sounds like a constant, high-stakes balancing act in the region, and I guess the U.S. is very aware of these threats and constantly evolving its defenses?
Without a doubt. The U.S. Navy spends an immense amount of resources on intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance in the region, constantly tracking Iranian movements and capabilities. They also continuously train and adapt their defenses specifically for the unique challenges of the Persian Gulf and the asymmetric threats posed by Iran. It's a dynamic, ever-evolving chess match.
That's reassuring in a way, to know that these threats aren't taken lightly. But it's still a very tense situation. So to wrap this up, DONFELIXX, what's the key takeaway for our listeners regarding Iran's focus on these U.S. warships?
The key takeaway, Jane, is that while the idea of Iran sinking U.S. aircraft carriers might seem far-fetched in a conventional sense, their asymmetric doctrine and growing capabilities, especially in missiles, drones, and swarm tactics, mean that their threats should not be dismissed as mere bluster. They aim to make any U.S. military action in the Gulf prohibitively costly, and they have developed serious means to attempt to do so. It's a stark reminder of the complexities and dangers of modern naval power projection in contested waters.
A very sobering thought, DONFELIXX. It really underscores the intricate and often dangerous strategic games being played out on the global stage. Thank you for breaking that down for us. It's a complex topic, and your insights have been invaluable.
My pleasure, Jane. Always good to shed light on these critical defense matters. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Stay informed, stay safe, and we'll catch you next time.